because I want to put this one in the archives here. Okay, so welcome everyone to the Art of Winning Zoomcast. I'm Sterling Strother with Dan Travis. We got a lot of people on here today, which is great. We've been having a great time with these. So this week, Dan and I were discussing, and this is kind of feeds off of last week. Some of the discussion started leading this way. Is we started getting to this down to the brass tacks, and we started talking about winning and losing, and in reference to obviously tennis matches here. But so what we wanted to do is this week talk about the pros and the cons of winning and the pros and cons of losing. Okay, so many times when we think about winning, we think, you know, that's awesome, right? And then when we lose, we're like, you know, that's not good. Okay, so and many times it can actually go the opposite way there, right? Winning can actually lead us down a dark path if we don't keep the winning in perspective, as well as losing. Obviously, losing too much, it can send us into a downward spiral. But so we want to talk today about winning and the pros and cons of winning, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about the losing part. I want to just keep it pretty simple starting off. Now I'm gonna give my kind of 2 cents in, and then I'm going to give it over to Dan to sort of expand, and then we're going to kind of open it up for some comments, questions, any additions, because obviously we all know in part, don't know everything. I don't know everything. Dan doesn't know everything, but this is a great way to talk through and get on some common ground. So I want to start off with winning and the pros of winning, right? I think these two things are born more out of humility than out of pride. Okay. So it's one thing to be proud. It's another thing to allow that being proud into being prideful, right? And then you want to be humble, but you don't want to give off this sense of false humility. So there's balances with both of those words. So, but I want to talk about the pros first, and it's born out of that being humble and having humility. When I think about tennis players, I think about Roger Federer. He's kind of the guy I would say that, probably exhibits the most humility in my mind. And I think some of the other guys that have come along, like Djokovic and Nadal, always seem to be, a humble dude. Djokovic kind of had to grow into that humility, in my opinion, but he's done an unbelievable job. So I think when you win, I think the obvious thing that happens is you become more confident. So you have confidence, right? And confidence is really an emotional response. It's can be defined as the feeling or belief that one can trust in their own abilities, right? So that's one. The second thing, I think that when you win, you get into the sense of being able to think more clearly. So clear thinking. And clear thinking is really the power to recognize and analyze a situation, and in this sense, a competition or a match, with a clear purpose, plan, or expectation. So once you start winning, you begin to get, your thinking becomes more clear about how you've taken your plan or your purpose or your expectation and made it real, right? So those are my 2 things for the pros. Dan, you want to sort of jump in here and add to those 2 pros of winning?
Yeah, I think there's obvious ones. There are what I call external benefits to winning. So it's going to allow you to advance in a tournament, and it's also there's a temporary boost for your self-confidence and self-esteem. I say temporary because you could lose the next match. And yeah, so that was it for me. I mean, I was working on the pros of winning, and they're the obvious ones. Well, you're going to move forward in a tournament, but yeah, so there's external and internal benefits, and the first of those is a temporary rise in confidence, but also an external one. to, you know, you can win some money, you can advance in a tournament, and that's all good. But I must admit, I did struggle to come up with the pros for winning, because, as I think we might get to in a minute, Sterling, there are some pitfalls.
Yeah, so let's go into some cons of winning. And these, to me, I kind of highlighted these under the sort of umbrella of being prideful, right? So when you win over. You can kind of go into this idea of, well, the first thing I said was a lot of people that win, they don't really know how they won, right? They don't, and so that can kind of lead to a sense of a false sense of security. So they don't really know how they won, and so they would. Here's some of the reasons that I came up with why people would say I won that match. They say, okay, it's because then I did what my coach asked me to do. So I stuck to, I was working with my coach on this, and we were working on this whatever, and we did it, and it worked out to my advantage. Another reason would be, one of my shots, it was just working for the day. That first serve I've been working on, or I've been working on this and that. Another reason would be I got lucky. I got lucky. It came out in my favor. The ball rolled in my way. Another reason would be my opponent had a meltdown and just gave up. Right. So those are some of the reasons that I came up with.
Yeah.
I think that those reasons can lead to other things. Okay. So I would say the first thing that can lead to is a false sense of expectation for future matches. So now that I'm winning, I should always expect to win the next match, right? Over and over and over. So there's this false expectation that I set for myself. And also another thing would be a sense of entitlement. Okay, so I've done all this work. I've worked really hard. I'm starting to win. Well, because of that, there's this justice mode that can happen. Okay, because I've done all this, I should be winning further and further. Dan, you want to expand on those two things or add
Yeah, I mean, I love this. I love it when you told me this, or you got me thinking about the reasons people think they win are really funny, and they do fall into those three categories. So when you ask your player why was it, they're going to say, "Oh, one of their shots was working really well." It's normally, "Oh, my forehand was on form today." Okay, but there's a counterbalance to that, right? So when they say, "Oh, my forehand was working really well today," or whatever shots it was, they'll then say, "Because it hasn't done it recently, yeah, and I put a lot of work into that shot." Okay, they'll then say, "Well, it was the other category. It's not just shots; it's luck. So I was lucky." Honestly, the amount of people who cannot accept that they might have won because, there must be, it was lucky this time, and it was about time I had some luck, because I've had some bad luck up until this point. Yeah, and then the third, actually, I think the most interesting, that some sense of justice has been restored in the universe by you winning. Right? People think that they lose, and basically it was unfair. I tell you why they think it's unfair. Not because they think they're brilliant and their opponent's crap. It's because they've been working so hard, yeah, on all the shots. They've been putting money, time into it, all the effort. It's about time I won. That's why I won, yeah. Because people think that justice is somehow very closely related to winning. Right? So the reason is because I've been working hard and God's rewarded me, or whoever it may be, with a win on this occasion. And yeah, the universe is now balanced up as it should be, because it wasn't my fault I lost last time, because I've been working really hard. Yeah?
Yep.
Equilibrium restored. I love that one. And that's lethal. Okay? Because it's wrong. You don't win because you've been working hard. That's a contributing factor, but it's not the primary reason. But yeah, going into justice mode, it's a killer. It really is.
Okay.
Because the counterpart, well, we'll talk about the counterpart in a minute to justice being achieved. Yeah.
So why don't we open up for everyone? I'm going to make sure everyone is muted. If you need to unmute from your end because you muted yourself, you'll have to do that. And we want to just kind of open it up to anything we said so far, any new ideas. Just jump right in there.
I got a question. So, like, what kind of questions would you ask, Sterling or Dan, to your player after they've won or lost that will sort of start to lead them down the path of understanding on their own, seemingly, what caused them to win or lose? How do you help them make that discovery?
Dan, you want to take a stab at that one?
I think the answer to that's quite simple. I actually asked them why they won. And that's a deeply uncomfortable question to ask someone. You know, 99% of players don't want to understand why they won. They don't want to look at why they lose either, because they think it's something to do with technique or shots. So when you ask them that, you've got to be prepared for, I don't know, that's what they say. The teenager, I don't know why my opponent wasn't very good. Right? There's a deep hostility to answering that question. Okay? And I think the reason is, Ramon, they don't know why they won.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I found, especially since 2012, when I started tracking the data of rally length, is it was amazing to me in the first few years, and even still when I pick up players, not necessarily the ones I work with on a regular basis because they know this very well, they have no idea about rally length. They think that, well, I won all the long points, but they don't realize that there were 10 long points out of 170. That's not the reason why they won, right? So I'll ask the same question. You know, what do you think the contributing things that maybe built up, or maybe what in your mind caused you to win the match? And then they give me all their answers, and I say, well, do you think it had anything to do with you being? Because some will say, well, I was really consistent. So I'll say, well, were you consistent on the first 2 shots? On 4 shots? Like, how many shots were you consistent on? And that really throws a lot of players for a loop because they have no idea what the answer is. And so, but I know what the answer is because I'm looking at their data on my app that I have the parent track, right? So the parent downloaded Tennis Mat Play and they're tracking, and I have the data. So I know that 70% of the points ended 0-4. But they, for some reason, like, well, I know we've gone through many reasons why players don't know that, because they fixate on the long point, or they fixate on those points that, in their mind stood out because of the length of them. So that's, I kind of lead from that, get their reasons, and then we sort of talk about the reality of what happened based on the data versus their perception of maybe how they won. So, that's how I start the conversation.
I love that. And you bring the data in because that objectifies everything. It takes the emotion out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it basically grounds everything. And that's why I'm a firm believer in having that type of data, is because it sets things in the proper perspective and context. And it leads the discussion of how do you win and what do you need to accomplish to win more. It sets it off in the right room of the house, if you will, right? Because a lot of people, they're talk about thought. We talk about thought. A lot of people are over here in this room, And really that room has nothing to do with winning. It's not all the long rallies you won. It's not that 1 or 2 points that was break point. It's not that, but you think it's that, but it was accumulation of all these other small things that happened that you didn't pick up on because you're not quite aware of that, or at least yet, until we talk about it. And then you're like, oh, okay. So that's.
Love it, man. Thank you.
Anybody else?
When you started talking, when I got the email about this topic, I was thinking more on a point-by-point basis. You guys were talking about the effects of winning a match.
Oh, no, we're talking about it all, but go ahead.
Yeah, but
Go
for
ahead.
me, I think it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of why you won an individual point. If you win a point, lots of players assume that means their shots were good. And if you lose the point, it means your shots were bad. And it's not just in tennis. I take stats for our high school basketball team, and if the shot goes in, now all of a sudden I took a good shot and I should take that again next time down the court. And I think it can be hard for them to grasp why they won a match because they don't fundamentally on a unit by unit basis understand why they won a single point.
Oh, Larry, we love you, man. You've been listening a lot, so you're starting to catch on to exactly what we're really about here at the Art of Winning. Is you have to break things down to the most important elements, which is the present moment. Which actually it goes one step before points. It actually goes into shots. So it's how are you playing your shot combinations? How is your opponent responding to those shot combinations? And if you win or lose the point, now you go, okay, I've won the point, I've lost the point. Now, how do I go reset back to my shot combinations, and how do I go about that? Dan, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of heartbreak involved. I mean, Ramon said, well, if you know the data, then that takes the emotion out of it. Yeah, maybe after the 10th time. But the first time you tell them that the reason they lost the match is because they made less errors when they think that they were more consistent, or that their forehand was where they got great emotional investment in, was their best shot, right? When you tell them actually that wasn't the won you that match, or if you tell them that it wasn't your winners that won the match, yeah, for the first time, eventually the data takes the emotion out of it. It doesn't on the first occasion, because you have to look. The truth hurts, and here's the truth: the reason you won, okay, and I don't care who you are, was you made less errors than your opponent. We want to believe, however, that the reason we won was because we played better, we had better shots. No, unfortunately, it's a negative. The reason you won because your opponent played worse than you did. Yeah. That's
and you probably contributed to that, I'm sure, right? Your shot making ability contributed to that, your opponent making more errors. And so, but the rub here that brings this idea of winning into perspective is there was a cause and effect, right? Or your, sorry, in the South, we got Harley. Yeah? We got Harleys in the South. Sorry about that. Or your opponent caused something and it affected you. So it's that back and forth. But I like where you're going with this, Larry, and breaking it down to, point to point. And we talked about this yesterday or on Friday, that every point is compartmentalized, right? It's every point we need to understand the context of that point based on whether we won or lost the last point. Okay. And so if we're counting, okay, we're using the mechanism of counting. And we use a mechanism where we created here at the Art of Winning called the momentum score. How many points have I won in a row? How many points have I lost in a row? Because that's going to dictate your mindset going into the next point, or at least we believe it definitely should dictate your mindset, because you at that point, you understand exactly where you are in the match, because you have decided to count how many points you've won or lost in a row. Are the points being traded back and forth? Win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. The last time I checked, the last time I watched a match or played a match, it didn't go win, lose, win, lose, win, lose, win, lose the entire match. Someone at some point or some time won 2 points in a row and created separation. Okay? It only takes 2 points in a row to create enough separation to trade and win the match, even if you're playing no ad scoring, right? It's very rare, even in a no ad scoring, because I talked to a lot of college coaches. It's rare that in no ad scoring, the points still go win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. Oh, somebody won, right? Maybe a couple of games, maybe at a certain time in the game when there's a serious mini battle going on. But for the most part, there's separation created when 2 points are won in a row. So one of the things that we've tried to talk about in regards to winning more is a player that is able to count and able to keep track of winning 2 points in a row, losing 2 points in a row, trying to win that third point in a row, which is big momentum, right? Keeping your opponent from winning 3 points in a row, because that's big momentum. Because once you win 3, we restart the momentum score, right? And we try to win 2 more in a row or 3 more in a row. So we're stacking this mindset of stacking clusters of points in a row in order to get to the finish line, right? And so the reason why is because we want the player to always be resetting their mindset back to the present moment and not get too carried away with future results or past errors or winners. So I like the way you brought that up, Larry, and thank you for doing that. Anyone else want to throw out an idea, a question?
Here,
I think everyone's unmuted.
you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, one of the things that I like to think now with what you mentioned about the combination of the points, also, I try to make sure players understand that when they're returning, they're not going to win as many points, of course. So what I try to tell them is to keep in mind that the goal when returning is to make points as long as possible throughout the games. So hopefully when that combination of points, normally it's going to happen in the 3-all, 4-all, 5-all. That's when you need them. You know, that's the moment where you need those 3 in a row, so then you can convert and break, and then eventually get the break on your side, because it's not that we're going to break 4 or 5 times in a set, right? It's going to happen maybe once. So you're trying to build, and then hopefully you get those 3 points in a row, like you were mentioning, right towards maybe the end of the set, when you already built up pressure on the player. Makes sense?
Yeah. I think, one of the things about winning multiple points in a row is when we talk about with our players, you want to have this mindset from the very beginning where you're already preparing yourself mentally and emotionally to strive after these multiple points in a row, right? And it's going to go back and forth. And this is one of the revealing things to all the players that I talk to, no matter what the age is. Players, you have to understand that you only need to win 55% of the total points. You don't need to win 70% of the points to win a tennis match. You only win just over 50%. And that way you're keeping your opponent from winning less than 50%. And there's always going to be a trade. I win 2, now you win 2 back to back, now it's 30 all. So there's a swing of 1s and 2s and even 3s, right? Because we see a lot of this going up 40 love, and then now it's deuce. And we talked about that, the past few weeks of like, what are the dynamics that happen there? But to get a player to understand that they're trying to build these moments and expect them to come, right? And so, like you said, okay, I'm at 4-all, right? I'm looking for that opportunity again. I've been looking at it all the way up to that point, but I'm really dialed in at that point because I've spent the last 7-8 games dialing myself up and staying in that moment. And so yeah, it's so important to understand it's coming and it's going to happen to you, and then you're going to do it to your opponent. Anyone else?
Yes, Roberto here.
Hey, Roberto.
Hey, how you doing? Here, Roberto in the UK. I don't know if anyone else in the UK. I think Dan is in the UK as well.
Yeah, I'm in the UK as well.
Oh, hi guys.
Yeah, I'm in the UK.
There you go.
No, yeah, just want to make a point. I was early on in performance coaches. I don't know if you guys were there in the LTA. Listen to Alistair. We were talking a lot about some of the things that you guys mentioned in here, which is about tracking, using the data, and show it and pass it to the players. And I think I'm a big fan of that. I think Dan and Sterling mentioned there before, when you ask the player, normally the player remembers the best shot or the best point. They don't have a clue how they won the match. They normally think I was better. It was my day. I was playing well.
I was lucky.
Exactly, I was lucky. But when you put the data in front of them, and I'm a bit more of the old-fashioned tracking matches on paper. You can show momentum. You can tell them, look, you won 3, 4, 5 points in a row, and then you lost 12 in a row, and somehow you pull a winner or you pull an ace, and then the match went into your way. Things like that. I think data is quite crucial for players, and they really need to understand to read it. I think most of us, we play as well the game, and at some point we didn't really care about those details. We just wanted to go out there and play. I think it's up to us as well to show the player how important is for them to analyze their game within their style of playing, if it makes sense what I'm saying.
Yep. So one of the things that we talk about is that, okay, so consistency framed this way. I'm going to see if I can win more 2 points in a row scenarios than my opponent. Or I'm going to try to stop my opponent from winning 2 points in a row. And so the mindset shifts to, what pattern do I need to run? What situation do I need to set up in this next point to stop my opponent from winning 2 in a row? How do I need to play this shot, right? How do I need to play when I'm trying to? So that's, having that data of, or the data knowledge of a player that can create separation by winning multiple points in a row is going to create the momentum in their favor. Knowing that it can shift back quickly to myself, how do I keep it from shifting back too quickly, right?
Mm.
Can I win 2 in a row? I know maybe I lose a point. Can I win a point, lose a point, then win 2 more? So how can I compound my momentum on top of everything, right? And so I'm gradually increasing my chances of winning the game, winning the set, winning the match, right? So I'm breaking my plans down and to this idea of incrementally capturing the momentum. Any thoughts on that idea? Dan.
Yeah, thank you. It's quite interesting when you look at when a player's trying to prevent your opponent getting 2 or 3 in a row, players are very good at preventing conversions, and we know the reasons for that. We know that the percentages when you're 2 points down are definitely on your side. Okay, and if you look at how well players actually do that, they stop the other person getting conversions. You can understand why on the other side it's so hard to get conversions. Okay.
A conversion is winning 3 points in a row for.
Yeah. So if you're 2 points up, or even if you're one, we know how hard it is to win 2 in a row, right? So players are much, much better at preventing the opposition than building on the other side. And that's a fundamental part of tennis that's missed. So if you won the match, whether you realise it or not, you would have won more conversions. So you would have won more chunks of 3 in a row than your opponent did. And that's true whether you knew that or you didn't. If you didn't know about, it's a massive advantage if you did know, because you can control the situation and you can build on that. You can also prevent yourself from, those heavy defeats by coming back all the time. But Sterling, would you agree with that point, that whether you knew it or not, you would have won because you had more conversions? And when you point that out to someone, they go, "Well, that's not the reason. It was my brilliant forehand. It had nothing to do with these nonsense numbers of yours. What are you doing, man?"
Right. It's really interesting that once you start tracking this idea of multiple points in a row and the momentum and show it to a player, it's really interesting because it almost demystifies their idea of how they won the match, right? And even though, yes, maybe their forehand was doing wonderful that day, maybe their first serve was unbelievable and they were winning a lot of points off their first serve, but the idea that needs to be contextualized in the actual reality of why they won. They won because they were more consistent at winning 2 and 3 points in a row than their opponent. And so for a player to understand that, to realize that, you can now actually control that aspect more. And I say more. You can't control it completely, obviously, because you can't control everything, every response back from your opponent, right? So some opponents are going to react in ways that maybe surprise you. But you should, as you count this opportunity, or you create an opportunity to win multiple points in a row by playing smarter patterns at a certain moment in time. For instance, that you're down 2 points, you've lost 2 points in a row, so it's love 30. The chances of you winning the next point and the score being 15-30 is far greater than you going down love 40. It's like an 80-20 probability, right? 80% you're going to win the next point and the score's going to be 15-30. If you know that, right, it doesn't give you the liberty to play reckless, but what it does is it gives you a psychological advantage over your opponent. Your opponent is up 30 love. They're thinking, oh, I can just drop the bomb right here. Go ahead and drop it, because that's going to lead me to winning. That's going to prove my 80%, right? Because so understanding this idea of quantifying what momentum is, right? Because for the longest time, momentum is we know momentum is a feeling, because everyone says, I feel the momentum. I feel like it was my way, right? But when you understand that momentum is winning the moment back to back to back, right? That the first 6 letters of momentum is the word moment. And if you can win that multiple times and you can do that more consistently than your opponent, the odds are forever in your favor to win more on a consistent basis, because you're using it as an intellectual ammunition, if you will. You're highlighting the fact that you it's almost like you have this, you automatically have a mental advantage over your opponent. Because if your opponent's not thinking this, they're playing one shot at a time. They're trying to win 1 point at a time, and maybe they're trying to clone what they just did to win another one, which is a temptation you want to stay away from because of the probability, if you will. So that's the idea of keeping the momentum score, understanding how those momentums shift, how they really shift in a match. Anyone else? Maybe you're just joining us and you're like, what the heck are these people talking about?
Yeah. Can I add something?
Go ahead.
Sorry, Dan. Sorry. I probably have missed some of the other webinars before. I just wanted to ask, like, when you're going through a match with a player, and obviously as you guys have been saying, you'd go through the numbers and all the objective data. When would you throw in, like, to looking at the actual process, to actually, obviously I know, like, the data is part of the process, but then, like, looking at maybe, you were giving too much space, or your positioning was not so good, or or you were not using your forehand enough, or you were always, you were backing up, and all this kind of stuff. Would that come in at the start of the start, or would you bring that right at the end?
You mean once they've played a match and you've watched and analyzed, and then you go into practice? When do you bring it up?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When would you bring that? Yeah, the actual process of what has actually happened.
Right, the contributing factors to losing or winning, right? With regard to movement or not playing your forehand enough.
Exactly, or positioning or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is one of the reasons why I developed my app, is one of the things on my app is you can actually record what the first two shot combination was. So if they're returning, was it a forehand, a backhand, forehand combination, backhand, there's only 4 when you're returning. And then where did I serve the ball? Outside, middle, or tee, right? Inside run cage. And then did I play a forehand or backhand next, right? And so the reason why on the app you only record the first 2 shot combination is 60 to 70% of the points in there. And so if I know what you started with, I can probably, because most of the points ended there, we can at least begin the conversation there, right? We can begin, how did you start the point, right? Because remember, when you start a point, it's about to end most of the time. So, were you getting a lot of backhands after you served? And the data shows that, right, on the app, or if you're tracking it by hand, right? Were you getting a lot of forehand backhand combinations when you returned the first 2 shots you hit, right? And so that leads you to the question of, the data helps you ask as a coach a better question to your player, right? Instead of you asking how did you do, how did you feel, and then let the player dictate the narrative of how they think the match went. Then with the data, you can bring them to ground zero and say, well, wait a minute. I understand you feel like your forehand failed you. Where do you think your forehand failed you, right? And most of the time it failed them right at the beginning of the point. Maybe they hit the ball too short. They played a forehand, but it was too short. And you can lead them with a more precise question, right, to get a more precise answer. And so I would say that, you want to do that a little bit at the beginning of the practice after a match. You just kind of probe for what the player was feeling. And then, I've created, and Dan and I have created together, and I've actually created this with my players. We've created game scenarios and point scenarios that will reveal that on the practice court right in front of your very eyes. So if you have a player and you have a hitting partner, you say, okay, we're going to play a game called first strike point game, which means if you make the first 2 shots, you get a point, and then you keep playing the point to see who wins the point, you get a bonus point, right? But so what you're doing is you're rewarding each player for making the first 2 shots. And if they're playing competitively, somebody's going to miss because they're trying to win the point. And so, but you're also analyzing a coach, what shots are they playing on their first 2, right? And is it a contributing factor to why they're losing that point, right, so early? And so to me, the data, the best way to use the data is to create these practice scenarios that reflect what actually happened in the match. And what's really interesting is and I'll just say this real quick. So today I have with a 14-year-old girl. She's nationally ranked in the U.S. And so we're playing this game. We actually created a game together called Vacuum, which is, it was all based on her ability to eliminate as many errors in the first 4 shots that she played on her side of the court. And so we had a point system where she was rewarded for making the first 2, but then I got the points if she made an error within the first 4 shots she hit. So if she made an error on her first 2 shots, I got 4 points. That's brutal. That's brutal mentally and emotionally. But she made her first 4 shots. She got 3 points. 1 for the first 2, and then a point each for the next 2. So it was this. The way I created the point system was it set up a situation for her to experience the same emotions that she would experience on the match court. And so that's all based on, the whole game was based on the data and the numbers. And then I created a scenario that was very challenging for her. And she had to play certain patterns on her first 2 shots. That was another caveat, because she's an advanced player. So her first 2 shots from the deuce court had to be a backhand forehand combination. So I served down the tee, and then I hit it to her forehand. And then on the other side, it was she had to play a forehand and then to play a backhand. So if you pay attention to those combinations, on both of those combinations, she hits the first shot, she has to reverse back to the second. So she has to create a shift split, right? And then if you just go run, if you go forehand backhand from the deuce, it's a run from the forehand to the backhand. So the idea of the data is to help you be a creative coach, in the sense that you're producing a practice court that feels and looks more like the match court. And if you do that, you will see a tremendous spike in the player's ability to create more wins at the shot level, point level, and then the game level, right? And that's why I call it the GPS navigation system to win. It's game, point, shot. Shots are first. Or am I creating successful 2-shot sequencing? Does that lead me to winning a point? Okay, can I create another 2-shot sequence, and on top of that, to create another two points in a row, right? So it's breaking it down to shots and then points and then moving from there. So does that give you an idea of does that answer your question, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. That really answers the question. And I mean, just the point that you say that we have to make sure as much as possible that the practice court looks as much as possible as the match court.
To me, that's been the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
To me, that is the question that we all need to work really hard at answering, is can we make the practice court look and feel like the match court? This is what my friend Craig O'Shaughnessy is all about. It's what I've been about since 2012. And it's what we're doing here at the Art of Winning, is we want to help coaches be able to navigate that. Dan.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, a really good point here. And thank you for bringing it up. Look, this is the way I describe what happens both on the practice court and in the match court. Okay, imagine a rope. Okay, where you keep the tension from point to point. Okay, and what you've got to try and do on the practice court is keep this tension between points, because what happens on the practice court happens on the match court. Okay, and this is what happens. This is why people don't win more. All right, because of the tennis scoring system, you end up thinking that you are in a position where there's a gap between you and your opponent. Okay, that could be in the game score, for example, 40-love. There is a gap, but it's a lot smaller than 40-love suggests. 4-1 up, for example, in game score makes you think that you are far further ahead than you are. Okay, these are the danger points in a match. This is where people lose, right? Because what they do at 4-1 up is they have a break. 4-1 up. Okay, I've worked really hard to get to 4, right? It's 4-1, there's a gap, yeah? And the tension in that rope goes boom, right? It drops. Let's have a look quickly, if it's all right, Sterling. Can I just continue this for a minute or so? Let's look at what happens on the practice court. There you are, you're doing your stuff. You're maybe focused for quite some time, right? And then if you're not scoring, it's, well, let's have a break now and look at the serve. Yeah? Or let's hit some backhands. Yeah? Let's, we'll work out some technique. Again, on the practice court, that tension goes, shoo. What Sterling does, and the beautiful thing about Sterling's work, right, is the name of his games, right? They are legendary across the world now. We've got Tsunami, Juices Are Wild. It's brilliant, right? What the games do is they keep the tension on the practice court. And that's what you want to duplicate in the match scenario, okay? That's why you need to look at those games in a lot of detail and start scoring in the way that Sterling described. Can't wait to try Hoover, by the way.
Yeah. So that is, the idea around counting and around creating practice around measuring things, right? We know that we, in order to achieve anything humanly possible, we have this capacity to measure things, and the best way to measure your progress in a match or in a point in competition is by counting, right? And the fascinating thing about counting is that, one, the more you do it, the more it almost becomes an automatic thing. So like when I play now, I'm not actually like figuring out what the score is, or I know it intuitively, right? And my brain immediately goes to, okay, I know what pattern I'm going to run. So if I'm up 2-0, 30-love, then my next pattern is a more boring pattern. My next 2 shots are very boring. Okay. And the reason why they're boring is I know my opponent is about to play a lot better than me, because they have to, unless they just check out. But most competitors that are focused and concentrated, they're going to automatically play better. So if I can, like Dan said, by playing a more boring pattern up 2-0, 30 love. I'm keeping the tension on that moment so that opponent they have to make less errors than me, because I take away their advantage by me making a silly error, being up 2-0, because I know I'm up 2-0, not 30 love. The tennis score is extremely deceiving. When you're up 30 love, you're not up 30 points to 0. But that's what your brain thinks, because 30 is a lot bigger number than 2. And it sounds so like, when you hear it, you're like, it's so obvious. But then you think about it and you're going, that's very powerful. That's a very powerful moment. When you play this way, when you play with this type of mindset in practice, it's unbelievable how your mind just shifts, right? You're like, yeah, I'm up 2-0, but to win 3 in a row is really tough. That means I'm going to be up 40 love.
Yeah, but the point is, you're up 2-0, but you want 3.
You want 3. Yeah, you want 3 and not 40 love. That's a big difference, right? If you think about it, getting to 3 versus getting to 40 love and 1 point away from winning the game. See, if you're trying to get to 3, you're not thinking I'm 1 point away now. You're just thinking I'm trying to get to 3. And then once you do it, you're like, oh, okay, I'm 1 point away, but it doesn't matter to you. Why? Because you reset back to 0-0. Okay, let me see if I can win 1 point. Go ahead.
Yeah. Right. Here's why our method is so cool. Okay. You carry the 2 points over from one game to the other. Right? So if you've got a momentum point, which is 2 in a row, right? And you've just won the game, you carry it into the next game. Keeping the tension, because this is what most people do at the beginning of a game. They start again. Because, well, it's the beginning of the game. I've won the last one. Let's see how this one goes. Ooh, very nice and fluffy. Yeah? But if you're a momentum player and you've been trained, you're going in there knowing that either you've got 2 points, which is probably what happened, right? Particularly if it went to juice. You'll carry 2 over if you won. If you lost the game, it's the beginning of the next game is dangerous, because you will most likely to have lost 2 points in a row. Yeah? So you've got to prevent at the beginning, the very first point of the next game, where you're thinking of chilling out and having a break, right? You've got to stop that person, your opponent, from getting their conversion. That, again, is where matches are lost, because the traditional scoring doesn't carry over. Momentum scoring does. It keeps attention, not just between points, but between the games. Critical feature, I think.
Right.
Sorry for interrupting you, sir.
No, that's good. So, just like Dan said, so, typically when you lose a game, you've lost 2 points in a row, right? Deuce, 30 all, whatever. So if that's the case, you're going into the next game, you know 2 things. One, I've got to stop this player from winning 3 in a row. And number 2, you actually have the advantage to do that, because it's much more difficult to win 3 in a row than to just win 1 point, right? So if you understand that, when you walk to the next game, your plan is based on the real score of the match. And the real score of the match, and the reason why that's why we call it the momentum score, the real score is where's the momentum? Because we know momentum shifts by point to point to point. And so that's what we're talking about. That's the mindset of this. And so when you go into practice with your player, are you creating a scenario that your player has to deal with that information, whether they know it or not? Because most players don't play with this type of information. They don't keep the momentum score. And so that's why when they win, they don't know why they won. They don't really know the real reason why they won, right? And so So CUDA, is it CUDA? Yep.
Yeah. I
Okay.
absolutely get that.
Yeah. So that's why, when as the player's working on this momentum score and how to negotiate the tension and to keep the tension, right? Tension is good, right? You don't want to try to eliminate pressure and tension altogether because it actually helps you focus. Okay. You want to be able to negotiate with the tension. Okay. And when you negotiate something, there's give and take, right? And the better perspective you have of the situation, the better you negotiate, right? So if I'm up 2 in a row, if I've won 2 points in a row, I'm going to negotiate the next point, planning better, right? I'm going to play probably my best pattern that's the most boring, right? And the reason why we know this works is because we test everything we're talking about. We've tested it since 2012. And this is how we're able, this is why I'm able to, work out the percentages of the probability of you going to win the next point, right? And it's based on thousands and thousands of data points and matches, over time. And you can reconcile it in your own head by simply going out and you're watching a match and you're counting. You're counting how many points did the opponent win right there. What's the momentum score? And so you can see the flow yourself. And we've got examples on my personal website, and then we've got on transformpracticecourt.com, and we also have them on the Art of Winning. So you can kind of see what we're talking about. And then you go out and do it yourself. Any other last questions? We're going to be wrapping it up here soon. Any other thoughts about today as we go?
This is probably a really broad question with a long answer, but how does this sort of methodology and this thinking relate to doubles?
So doubles is the points are shorter in doubles than singles. So I would say this: if you're not making the first 2 shots of every single point in doubles, you're gonna lose.
Scott.
You're gonna flat out lose the match. If you can't, if you haven't worked on your patterns if you haven't worked your 2-shot pattern, first strike, what we call first strike pattern, which is the first 2 shots you hit, whether you're returning or serving, you're done. You're absolutely done. And so when I work with my doubles teams, especially in high school tennis, and the reason why we had an 88% win percentage, and that's across all 3 lines, is because my players knew exactly what 2-shot sequence they were about to run, and they did everything in their power to be successful at it. And they had contingency plans too. They had a contingency, right? So they did it so much in practice, it became so automatic that when they got a backhand, they knew exactly where they're hitting it. They got a forehand, they knew exactly where they're going with it, right? And so and their partner knew exactly what they were going to do, so they were able to respond in like. And so, I mean, is that?
Yeah,
that's all I can do for the time we have now. But
no, I know this is a great conversation. I really appreciate you guys.
So, anything else? Any last minute?
Have to say I'm enjoying it in a way that I know that I get the first sets a lot, but and then I always, not always, but I'm very often a 3-setter because I lose my what you're calling tension into the second set. So it's quite interesting to hear you guys say carry over the points into the next match, the next game, and even if it is a set, you move it on. I think that's definitely something I think would be good for me personally.
Right. So one of the
we're
things
going to look at that tomorrow, won't we, Sterling?
Yeah. One of the things about moving when you win the first set is you have to understand that your opponent is going to play better right out of the gate. they're going to play like you've never seen them play before. But the thing that you got to realize is that what got you the win in the first set is going to keep you in that mini battle starting out the second set. And it's going to be back and forth there. 2-2, 3-2, 3-3.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you just go away from, unless you succumb to that, like you said, you relax too much and you release the tension coming off the first. But Andy, we're gonna work with you on that. We got big plans to help you.
We
Thanks.
got back on that.
That will
Don't
not
worry.
happen much.
Keep going.
We're gonna give you so much. We're gonna give you so much simplicity that
Right.
it's gonna blow your mind, because it really
Yeah.
is. It really is. The magic is in the simplicity of moving from two shots to shoot two shots, and from point to point.
Yeah.
So there is complexity in the simplicity, but it's almost hidden. You don't realize it until you've done it enough, and you're like, holy cow. Like, this has addressed so many things that so.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Good. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of losing tomorrow. So if you can, join us tomorrow. We're also going to record these and put them up on a link. So Dan, if we don't have your email, if you could send it to Dan, what email do you want them sent to?
I've got everyone's email.
Oh, you'd have everyone's email. Perfect.
I don't actually know. I don't have Sam's, or
Okay.
I might have Kuda's. I don't know. Kuda, do you get my emails?
Yeah, I did get your emails. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Marvelous.
So send it to Dan at artandscienceofwinning.com. artandscienceofwinning.com. Dan at art of, and if we don't have you, and that way you'll get the link and you rewatch and so tomorrow we're going to talk about, tomorrow's conversation is going to be really good, because this is going to be really interesting to talk about the pros of losing. Okay, and it's probably not what you're thinking, so which is good. But anyway, hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.